Good morning, Jorge. It's March the 8th. This is our third meeting.
Good morning.
Last time we spoke, we discussed the phenomenon of a fraud and a joke inhabiting the Oval Office, and it's curious that I should want to begin my remarks today about pipelines and climate denialism and climate change and global warming and greenhouse gases with a reference to Donald Trump, of all people. It's because even disasters have a silver lining. And the silver lining that I would ascribe to Donald Trump is that there is going to be presidential approval of the Keystone pipeline. I am a pipeline supporter. I'm sure that we're going to have something of a disagreement today, but I would hasten to point out that there are already 2.5 million miles of pipeline, oil and gas pipelines in North America. Adding another, I believe, approximately 1,500 miles for the Keystone pipeline is not a tremendous addition to the complex. I am all for economic development. I am completely in agreement with Justin Trudeau when he says that no country would leave a resource like the oil sands in the ground. I want to see it developed. I want to see it marketed. I want to see it enrich the economy of Canada. Those are my opening remarks on the subject of pipelines.
Okay. I don't know if I would call it a silver lining. I think there's many aspects that the pipeline represents, many different things that I attack it at. I think when you said about the resource, that no one would leave it in the ground, I think I disagree with that attitude of just because we can, we should, and then we'll figure out the consequences later, or we won't care about that need to say that we need to exploit it. Well, we could exploit other things. We can do other things as well that we're not doing currently, right? Like there are other ideas just on the oil sands alone, just because it's there as an opportunity. Do we have to? Is that really the only option there is? Or is that one that we can see easiest, make the most money, the risk, we'll deal with it, we'll live with it, we'll see who gets affected. Is it really the only option? Like, well, we can start just with that. Are the oil sands really the only, like you see it as like, oh, we have to, we must?
The world will not end and the Canadian economy will not end if we leave that resource in the ground. But before we talk on that subject, I would ask you, what are your arguments for leaving that resource in the ground? I would ask you to note that the Obama State Department while Obama was president, came out with a multi-volume report and said the contribution to the greenhouse effect on the planet of the development of the oil sands is relatively insignificant. This would seem to undercut your basic, I haven't heard your argument yet for leaving the oil in the ground, but it would seem to undercut your argument. I ask you now for your reasons for leaving it in the ground.
For me, it goes more to the point of what it represents, and it's very close to the concept with the pipeline. I think the oil sands represent a way of going forward which isn't helpful to society. It's a way. It's reckless. There are like, how many people do we care about out of that? Because the oil sands have affected people, right? There are documentaries out there of people that have been down in the river communities, native communities specifically, that have, like, people have died in relation to this, right? Like, this has happened. But is it a small number? Sure, it might not be that many people. For me, it's more about what it represents and how we go about doing business, in how we treat the environment, then like, okay, you're saying it only represents this much out of the whole world. Yeah, but it's another example, and if we keep saying this is okay, well then let's come up with even other places in which we can do that. For me, it opens up the question that maybe this is a weird theory of, if we keep going with the oil sands, the minute that global warming has made the north warm enough for proper oil exploration, in before we even know if we can handle it, they'll do it. We'll start going up there into the Arctic and maybe create another disaster, because they have, like, there have been some oil disasters, right? Like the Gulf of Mexico would like to remind itself that it existed. Things can happen. Things that are way bigger than we can control. Like, we're pretty good at making something really, really, really big that when it falls, we can't really control it. That is, I think the oil sands do represent something like that for Canada. Mining, we do that too, but just in the subject of the oil sands, I don't like them because it represents a way of doing business that isn't great for the environment. It puts aside a few groups of people. But
on the part of the oil companies, I would say that once the extraction of the oil is done, there is a program to restore the environment to its previous state, if I could argue on behalf of the oil companies. But what I hear coming from you is basically an all-encompassing attitude that says fossil fuels are out, and we've got to use windmills, solar energy, hydropower, etc., anything but oil that puts carbon into the atmosphere, and anything but extraction that disturbs the environment, the pristine environment. I would argue that with progress comes dislocation and disturbance and discomfort to people. We had an industrial revolution that started in England, and of course it created quite a bit of dislocation for people who came from peasantry and became a proletariat, and they didn't have great lives. However, would we then argue that there should not have been an industrial revolution? When we look at what fossil fuels have done for the human race, and have done for economic progress, and have done to lift all kinds of populations from poverty to a good life, I have to argue on behalf of the use of fossil fuels. And when I look at statistics, you cannot be an expert in this, because to be an expert you have to devote your entire life and study to the statistics and the trends, etc. But from my understanding is that we're very, very far from being able to provide our energy needs simply from solar, wind, and hydro, and what they call renewables, for a very long time to come. And we have a dependence upon fossil fuels. And if we can pay ourselves in Canada rather than import from places like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, I'm all for fossil fuel extraction. I come back to the economic development of my own country. I say to you that the extraction process and the burning of the oil ultimately does contribute somewhat to the greenhouse gas effect. Mm-hmm. However, I would then point out that China is building coal-burning plants, even as we speak, on an incredible rate, and our contribution to putting carbon in the atmosphere is as nothing.
But they're also
compared.
Now, for size-wise, they're leading in green renewable energy. Their investment in solar, the investment in wind has gone up really high. So, like, I'm not defending China, because let's not go crazy here, but I get, like, it's a tough one because it's not perfect, and I'm not equating it to the trickle down economics of like, well, it's helping. Like, who is it really helping? I have a hard time. Maybe that's just me not understanding economics. Is it necessary to have this big industry? Like, does it really help move the economy for everybody? And we would be hypocrites to not be behind it, as it does. The idea here that I'm taking from you, it's like, well, we need it, it's good, and it's not that bad. And sometimes just for progress, what's the expression? You need to crack some eggs to make an omelet. That's where I feel you're telling me. You're like, hey, look, we're trying to make an omelet. Everyone's making, it's better than getting them to do it. I get that, but
I wish you hadn't ascribed that particular saying to me, because I know that every totalitarian regime in history has used that. We have to crack some eggs in order to make an omelet. I do not ascribe to that philosophy at all.
Look, we can be honest. That is what is going on, right? Like that is when it comes to oil, when it comes to things, because we have geniuses like Elon Musk who are telling you like, hey, if you give me all this, like if you really invest and we do this whole battery powered and thing, I can make it work around the world. But they're blocking him. They are letting him slowly do it because there's a business. There's a part that is just, well, there's one company that is right now making X amount of dollars with this thing that works, and they don't want to change it.
Nobody is blocking Elon Musk. In a free society, you cannot block somebody who's an entrepreneur. He's producing cars. He's doing all kinds of things. And this is precisely the way the human race works and progress works. Yes, fossil fuels will eventually disappear because it's a finite resource. The human race has to do something for the day when we no longer have oil to burn. And we have begun to do so. You mentioned China. Yeah, even big bad China, who doesn't give a flying F about anybody in the world, or Paris Accords or whatnot, they have started to invest in solar and wind, etc. Because they know fossil fuels eventually will be expired. That's the way it works. But for the present, economically, for people to have a proper standard of living, we have to continue to burn fossil fuels.
I mean, proper standard of living. Then we can start touching on consumerism. You said the great things that all this oil, like we are burning more energy and using more products than we need, right? Like there isn't, there's like, do we have any responsibility as a society to consume less?
You're willing to give up your car? Willing to give up your deluxe toaster?
Don't
willing to give up your
don't have
your
a car,
lights?
so yes, I'm willing to give up this fictional car. No, but I'm not. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I understand it. Like I get it. I know that if I want to visit my family in Argentina, I will take that airplane that burns an immense amount of fuel. Like I'm not 100% crazy about that, but I'm also do try and consume less. I do try. I'm not saying like we all have to just give up our like fully and completely on everything, but we need to be aware that we should try and create less, like consume less products to help, right?
The human race as a whole is aware, and I would ask you if you ever give thought to thanking those people who make it possible for you to fly to Argentina to see your grandmother with the use of fossil fuels.
Yes, I pay them, and they are making bank.
Did you ever think of thanking the people who created the means for you to do that? From the extraction of the oil and wherever it was extracted from,
I did.
to the use of it, the refining of it, etc.
Yes, with cold hard cash, I have thanked them, and they're living probably. I'm assuming the CEO of ExxonMobil isn't poor, right? Like I'm assuming I have contributed. I have had a car, so I have paid for gas, like that, right? That's I am thanking them in that sense. There's a few. 1 or 2 millionaires out there thanks to oil fuel, to fuel and to oil. The oil sense, I'm sure a lot of people made a lot of money thanks to it, and they're still making a lot of money thanks to it.
And tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, ordinary people, draw wages, good wages, because of the existence of that industry. And I'm saying we can expand it and employ even more people. For example, we discussed the Keystone for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
We're also looking at the probability that a cross-Canada pipeline will be built so that we can send oil to New Brunswick refineries, so that we don't have to have tankers from Venezuela or from Saudi Arabia come to New Brunswick refineries and sell us oil from other lands. We should be buying our own oil and thus enriching our own country.
I'll add the subject of the part of nationalism and the safety against other governments, as you say, Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, when it comes to that buy and selling of oil. Because if we live in a nice global economy, we should have no problem with being like, yeah, cool, Saudi Arabia oil. That's right. Like, oh yeah, they have more oil, easier to extract, and we did the math. It's safer to have a tanker from Venezuela than it is for us to put a pipeline across Canada in which something could happen.
You are projecting a utopian future.
Oh, I'm like, it's a discussion that needs to be had, and the question is a pipeline across Canada is it a national security issue? Is it a economic safety issue that we're not, if something happens, do we need it in that regard, or is it just we just want to make more money and this is the only option? I don't know if it's the only option. If oil, thinking that all those great minds that you said that have figured out how to extract oil from this and that, what happens if we move? It's like a ray of power. What happens if we move it to the left and they come up with something else, hydrogen? But then there is the reality that there's a money thing. Someone's making money out of not changing it, because that's what they, the music industry liked to sell you CDs. They were not happy about the fact that you can then now download music off the internet, because they lost money. No one can deny it. People lost money. And if we use less oil, if we have more electric cars, we're in Quebec. We have hydro electricity all over the place, a lot of it, yet we don't have as many electric cars as we could. Are we why do you think that is? Why don't we have?
Because it's not yet economically viable. And when it becomes so, and when it becomes profitable for people to pursue that, then we will have it, which we are beginning to have. The CDs that you mentioned in the music industry, they're almost extinct. Why? Those powerful people in Motown and in Hollywood and wherever they produce the records somehow were unable to stop the march of progress. Somehow.
Yes, but
and
the
yet,
thing with CDs was people weren't dying, the environment wasn't getting destroyed while we wait for society to do its thing. Now we have we have lobbying to worry about, in which, well, then maybe someone is trying, they realize that that's how it works, and they're blocking government from doing this normal evolution. What happens if there's groups that are making a lot of money with oil today, and they figure out a way to just, we can pay off all these politicians to stop this progress that people might be willing to? I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I don't know if progress is really getting a fair share right now, a fair shake, as they say. For me, what the electric car in Quebec thing, it's a real one. It's we have Hydro-Quebec, which is our own government-owned supplier of electricity.
Renewable energy,
which I know if you start looking into, hydro dams, this is more of they did a mess already, but so let's just enjoy what we already, the mess that we already created, but we can get the electricity, it's good. But why don't we do it? And for me, I wonder if the investment into the future, into Quebec being a more futuristic society, against that tax that they get from gas, which is, Quebec has one of the highest ones in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, that might be influencing this progress, this that could happen. And then there's the people that own the gas stations that might not want to let that happen. So is it happening because the politicians that would just have to help, with allowing more electric cars to be sold in Canada, incentives? I could make the argument that electric cars in Quebec could work really in an interesting way. But there's going to be, as you say, some people that will lose in this battle. The thing is, it might be, someone who's wealthy, not someone who's not.
I am all for creative destruction. People who lose from developments in industry and new inventions should not be protected. They should be made obsolete. Just like the buggy whip makers. Just like Smith Corona, the typewriter maker. No protection. Retrain yourself. Find a new vocation. Produce another article.
So you're open to this happening with fossil fuels?
Absolutely.
So you're saying Exxon, if they
and
don't
it is
start...
happening. It is happening. 20 years ago, what was the extent of solar power contribution to the energy grid? A fraction of what it is today. What was the extent of wind power contribution? A fraction of what it is. It is happening. You see electrical outlets for cars in Quebec, in Montreal now. I see it in the garage of my building. But back to the crux of our disagreement, I believe, I would base it upon your constant reiteration of, people are making money from this, and we don't want those people. You were sort of implying that I and my ideology doesn't want to see those people lose out. But as I've just explained with my creative destruction comments, that's not the case. But it's also the case that your comments about, people making money, that's what really drives the world. Well, making money does drive the world. Absolutely, it drives the world. And it's at the crux of this whole argument about whether or not people should be allowed to make money and whether corporations should be allowed to make money lies at the heart of the whole climate change debate, in my view, if we could sort of shift our perspective a little bit. There is, and we've discussed this 2 weeks ago in our very first dialogue, there is an anti-capitalist mentality in the world. I'm sure you agree. The capitalist view of the world has actually triumphed over the last several decades. Why do I say that? Because the Soviet Union collapsed, a communist dictatorship, to be replaced somewhat by a free enterprise system, even in Russia, somewhat. All of the communist countries of Eastern Europe embraced economic freedom, namely capitalism. We see in the world the twin basket cases of Cuba and Venezuela. One communist, one socialist. Basket cases. The fact that socialism doesn't work and has never worked is now generally accepted.
Where do you put Sweden and the Nordic countries?
Sweden is absolutely a capitalist economy. It is a socialist distribution of the wealth created by capitalists. Saab, vodka, Volvo, IKEA.
I think Finland makes vodka too. So
yes, these are capitalist enterprises, the like of which we never saw come out of any socialist country. Never.
How do you feel?
But let me make my point.
Yeah.
Let me make my point. The anti-capitalists are with us still. They saw the defeat of their utopias, would-be utopias in places like Russia, Eastern Europe, East Germany, Cuba, Venezuela. They saw the destruction of their dreams there. They saw that socialism never works, and yet they remained anti-capitalist. So what to do with their perspective? What to do with their anti-capitalist energy? They found a means to channel it. They found a means to indict capitalists and corporatism in climate change. they blame climate change on the corporate interests that allow fossil fuel burning and that fill the atmosphere with carbon. And this is the way that they now see they can overthrow capitalism and institute some, I don't know what they want to institute. I shudder to think about what they want to institute in place of capitalism, in place of economic freedom.
Right.
But they are blaming the corporate interests for poisoning the planet.
Well, I mean, are they blaming? At first, is who's they? That's a tough one. That's always. Who is this group of people? Where do they meet? Is there a membership? But that's a tough one always, right? Like there's always different levels and people. It's like when you have a march and you realize that, oh crap, we're all protesting against one thing, but also people bring posters for other stuff that you're like, I'm not with them. I'm against this. I saw that with the march against the war in Iraq many years ago. You weren't there. You're like, oh, wait. Why are we talking about Palestine? Why are we talking about Russia? Why are we talking about the Kurds? I was like, okay, I thought we were against that thing. So just to put that out there, because I feel your argument, it is lumping a lot of different aspects of people, because a lot of people who are aware about the environment will also support, just to bring him back, Tesla and a very capitalist mentality. Because you look at someone who a lot of people are like, hey, he wants to do renewable energy, but then he's selling cars and luxury cars and wanting to. The idea behind, you can have all different kinds of people that are aware that it's not so black and white. It's not, oh, let's destroy economies. Let's go back to a more socialist, or go back. Let's start a more socialist living. So I think we need to accept that in both sides there's a spectrum here, and people have different reasons and they want different outcomes. I think there will always be a group that is marginalized, sadly, and that group is bigger and bigger. Some would say, that's an impossible statistic, so I won't actually say it. But there's a huge group of people that are marginalized.
I don't understand what you mean by marginalized.
The poor, the minorities, and they see capitalism as a way that they're kept down. If you look at the U.S., there is so many economical ways that the poor are being kept down. The middle class is shrinking. Like there's these things that people have a disdain for capitalism because a lot of people suffer. Banks giving out predatory loans, no regulations being there to protect the everyday person, the subprime mortgages that destroyed so many communities, the Walmarts that come into a community, put up their big businesses, kill all small businesses. There's a lot of times that capitalism, just that freedom does destroy. It's a bit of just because you're the biggest person in town, if you're bigger than someone else, you can beat them up. No one needs to protect the smaller guy. So a lot of people will try and think that socialism could work because they just want, the marginalized not to be marginalized.
They'd be subsidizing the Smith Corona workers who are producing typewriters. They'd hate to see those typewriter manufacturers go out of business because people won't have a job. People won't be earning money. People won't be able to feed their families. They've got to continue to produce those typewriters.
Or you can switch that around and be like, okay, we as a society have a problem. We got 1,000 people that work at this typewriting company that is clearly not going to work. Hey, owner of said company, do you want to hire someone that could bring you to the future? Okay, cool. Now you're going to start making computers, whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, so you're the central authority, and you're going to be able to tell people what to do.
no,
so you
but
have
that's
to have a
but
central
I'm
authority.
incentive. We can also work in an incentive for change in the future and trying to stay afloat. Like you're saying, oh, let's just keep them selling typewriters when I can go. It's like, okay, we can try and help you go to the future. If it doesn't work, then
This is what the market does. That's the
it's
power
not as
and the
clean,
magic
it's
of
not
the
a
market.
clean cut. I'll go back to the environment because I feel that's a whole that's another, the environmental part of it. The facts are there, and the facts and statistics always create that annoying thing that you can read them in 100 different ways. The environment, and we are having a lot of environmentally created social issues, that drought, things that they have said, oh, well, the environment is changing, it's warming, and it's going to create more drought, hotter summers, etc., etc. Do we care to do something about it, or do we just want to react when it happens? So many of our cities are right by the ocean because that was in the past. That's where you needed your cities to be. Do we care about that? Do we care about cities disappearing? Do we care about that stuff? And are we being short-sighted? Are we being, our gains of today will be the cost of great problems in 50 years? That's a tough one for a lot of people. That's a tough pill to swallow when it comes to making money and just looking at it right now. It can lead to a bigger question about what kind of society we want to live in. What kind of, are we a society that cares about just us today? Us in 10 years, us being, you can go to like the smallest group, 100 people that 1,000 people that a whole city, whole country, the world as a whole. Like you have to differentiate, like, what are we thinking when we do things like the pipelines. Will we in 100 years, will they look at us and be like, why are those idiots did that? We now have all these problems that they caused. Did they really think that it was going to go well? Well, then you look at the history books and you're like, well, a lot of people said it could be too dangerous to do it, but they did it anyways. I don't know if I'm going all over the place, which I am.
I come back to the point I made about 2.5 million miles of pipeline that exist in North America. Yes, there's a possibility that there will be leakages and problems there from, but they are very limited and very few and far between. But I would complete my remarks on this whole topic by saying I'm not sure at all, as a layman, and I'd have to study the matter full time in order to be sure either way. I'm not sure that our industrial progress right now is leading to environmental Armageddon. I'm not sure of that at all. I think the possibility that idea is absurd is just as likely as that it's true. Mm-hmm. And I would also posit that if there were environmental disaster coming upon us, oceans rising to sweep away coastal cities, etc., etc., and we had absolutely no control over that phenomenon. Let's say it had something to do with the sun. Let's say it had something to do with a natural disaster in the middle of the earth.
Or an asteroid.
Something.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think for a moment that the human race would not find a means to counteract the phenomenon? I, with great faith in the ability of the human race, believe that it would be so.
Sure. I I think, again, we got to go back to the discussion of what kind of society we want to live in. Are we thinking a smaller, or are we thinking all 7 billion of us? Because even in those cases, yes, we can still survive, but a lot of people will die in the process. And are we trying to minimize how many people are affected by things that we can't control? At that point, we can just tell everybody to move away from the coast and just say, why don't we all just live inland, and we can fix that issue. And it's a reality, but we're stubborn, and we're like, as so many people like to build houses right on the ocean, and then they cry when the ocean destroys them. We as a society, that represents a lot of what we do. We like to build houses right on the beach, and then somehow get really angry when we realize how the ocean works, and the ocean comes in, takes out sand, destroys your house.
I cannot forbear from commenting that there are probably as many scientists who would dismiss the disaster scenario as there are scientists who are promoting it. And on that note, I think we should conclude our dialogue of today.
Yes.
And admit that we haven't come to any conclusions, but that we have differing perspectives on the issue.
I think it's an interesting discussion, and you're definitely right. I don't think we have agreed on too much today, but that's great.
But thank you for the opportunity again.